What if something as ordinary as the leftovers sitting in your refrigerator right now is quietly placing stress on one of the most important organs in your body, and you have no idea it's happening? For many older adults, leftovers represent comfort, savings, and practicality. They reduce waste, simplify meal planning, and feel completely harmless. But the real issue is not leftovers themselves. The concern lies in how certain foods are stored, reheated, and repeatedly exposed to high temperatures over time. That difference matters more than most people realize. Behind your stomach sits a small but powerful organ called the pancreas. It performs two critical jobs that keep your body functioning properly. First, it releases digestive enzymes that help break down fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. Second, it produces hormones like insulin that regulate blood sugar. Because it works constantly to process nutrients and respond to glucose levels, the pancreas is metabolically active and sensitive to internal stress signals. According to the National Institutes of Health, pancreatic cancer often develops silently without obvious early warning signs. That is why long-term lifestyle patterns deserve attention. Risk is rarely about one meal. It is about repeated exposure over years. When researchers study cancer development, they focus on mechanisms like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and DNA damage, not isolated incidents, but cumulative strain. When foods are cooked at very high temperatures or reheated multiple times, certain chemical compounds can form. Research indexed in PubMed has described how high-heat cooking methods may generate substances such as heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, especially in meats. In laboratory environments, these compounds have shown the ability to damage DNA. Think of DNA as the instruction manual inside every cell. It tells cells when to grow, repair, or rest. When that manual is repeatedly exposed to chemical interference, the body's repair systems must work harder. Most of the time, those systems perform remarkably well, but over decades, accumulated cellular damage may increase biological stress. The pancreas, because it helps process nutrients and manage blood sugar, is exposed to circulating inflammatory signals and metabolic fluctuations every day. The World Health Organization has classified processed meats as carcinogenic based on population-level evidence linking long-term consumption to increased cancer risk, particularly colorectal cancer. This does not mean that eating reheated meat automatically leads to pancreatic cancer. It does mean that certain food processing and cooking methods may contribute to broader cancer risk patterns. Similarly, Harvard Health explains that chronic inflammation, often influenced by diet, excess body weight, smoking, sleep quality, and metabolic health, creates an internal environment that may support disease development over time. Inflammation can be compared to a small fire that never fully goes out. One spark is manageable. Continuous sparks day after day can gradually weaken surrounding structures. Food safety authorities such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the NHS emphasize that improper storage and reheating can allow bacterial growth or toxin formation. Foodborne illness is not the same as cancer, but repeated gastrointestinal irritation and systemic stress can affect overall organ resilience, especially in older adults whose immune responses may be less robust. Aging naturally reduces cellular repair efficiency. The Cleveland Clinic notes that pancreatic health is closely linked to metabolic conditions such as obesity and type 2 diabetes, both associated with chronic low-grade inflammation. It is essential to clarify that no single reheated meal has been proven to directly cause pancreatic cancer. Cancer is complex and multifactorial, involving genetics, environmental exposures, lifestyle habits, and aging. However, credible health institutions consistently recommend reducing repeated exposure to high-heat cooking byproducts, limiting processed meats, practicing safe food storage, and supporting metabolic health. These recommendations are grounded in decades of research. This information is educational and not medical advice. Anyone with digestive symptoms or concerns about cancer risk should consult a qualified healthcare professional for personalized guidance. Processed meats like ham, sausages, bacon, hot dogs, and deli slices are popular for a reason. They are convenient, flavorful, and easy to store for days. But these foods have been closely studied for years. Through its International Agency for Research on Cancer, The World Health Organization has classified processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen. That classification does not mean eating a sandwich guarantees cancer. It means there is strong scientific evidence that regular consumption is associated with an increased risk of certain cancers, particularly colorectal cancer. The concern centers on preservation methods and what happens during high-heat cooking or reheating. Processed meats often contain nitrates and nitrites added to preserve color and prevent bacterial growth. When exposed to high temperatures, these compounds can form nitrosamines, which laboratory research indexed in PubMed has shown can damage cellular DNA. Again, think of DNA as a detailed instruction manual. When chemical compounds interact with that manual, they can create subtle alterations. The body's repair systems usually correct these changes. But according to the National Institutes of Health, repeated exposure to DNA-damaging substances may increase the likelihood that some errors persist over time. Reheating processed meats can intensify certain chemical reactions. Frying bacon until very crisp or microwaving deli meats until steaming may increase formation of potentially harmful compounds. Harvard Health explains that cooking methods such as grilling, pan-frying, or broiling at high temperatures can produce heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. While often discussed in relation to red meat, processed meats are not immune to similar reactions. Laboratory studies suggest these compounds can cause genetic mutations in experimental settings, which is why public health organizations recommend moderation and safer cooking techniques. The pancreas may not be directly targeted, but it can be indirectly affected through broader mechanisms such as inflammation and oxidative stress. The Cleveland Clinic describes oxidative stress as an imbalance between free radicals and antioxidants. Free radicals are unstable molecules that can damage cells when not neutralized. Diets high in heavily processed and repeatedly heated meats may contribute to oxidative stress, especially when combined with smoking, obesity, or poorly controlled blood sugar. Chronic inflammation, described by the National Institutes of Health and the Mayo Clinic, creates ongoing internal strain. This strain may increase vulnerability in organs, including the pancreas. It is important to emphasize that reheating deli meat once does not cause pancreatic cancer. Risk is influenced by genetics, age, lifestyle, metabolic health, and environmental exposures. However, consistent findings from major health organizations support limiting processed meat intake and avoiding repeated high-heat cooking. For older adults especially, adopting careful food safety practices and choosing fresh, minimally processed protein sources more often may help reduce cumulative risk. Public health guidance focuses on patterns, not isolated meals. Over time, small daily decisions shape long-term outcomes. And understanding those patterns gives you the power to make informed choices that support your health for years to come. Over time, small daily decisions shape long-term outcomes, and understanding those patterns gives you the power to make informed choices that support your health for years to come. That brings us to another common leftover sitting in millions of kitchens: rice, along with pasta and potatoes. These starchy foods are staples around the world. On their own, they are not dangerous. The concern begins with storage and reheating practices that many people overlook. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, cooked rice can sometimes contain spores from a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. These spores are naturally present in soil and can survive the cooking process. When rice is left at room temperature for extended periods, especially in warm environments, the spores can multiply and produce toxins. Reheating may destroy active bacteria, but it does not always eliminate toxins that have already formed. This is why food safety agencies emphasize prompt refrigeration rather than relying on heat to make food safe later. The NHS explains that Bacillus cereus can cause food poisoning symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. While food poisoning is usually short-term and not directly linked to cancer, repeated gastrointestinal stress is not ideal, particularly for older adults. As we age, immune responses become less efficient. Digestive organs may also be more sensitive to irritation. The pancreas plays a supporting role in digestion by releasing enzymes that break down carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. If the digestive system is frequently disturbed, inflammatory signals can increase. The National Institutes of Health describes chronic inflammation as one of the biological processes studied in long-term disease development. Inflammation is protective when brief. It helps the body fight infection and repair tissue. But when it becomes persistent, it can create strain throughout the body. Think of it as a defense system that never fully powers down. Over time, that constant activation may contribute to overall cellular stress. Improper storage is more common than many realize. The CDC recommends refrigerating cooked foods within 2 hours, or within 1 hour if room temperatures exceed 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Rice left on a kitchen counter overnight provides an ideal environment for bacterial growth. Many assume that if food looks and smells fine, it must be safe. However, toxins from Bacillus cereus do not always alter appearance or odor. This invisible risk is why preventive handling matters more than visual inspection. The NHS further advises storing cooked rice in the refrigerator for no more than 1 day and reheating it until steaming hot throughout. Even then, reheating is not a guarantee if toxins formed earlier. From a broader perspective, repeated exposure to foodborne toxins can increase systemic stress. The Cleveland Clinic explains that when the body fights infection or toxin exposure, it releases inflammatory chemicals. Occasional activation is normal. Repeated activation adds to overall inflammatory load. It is important to be clear, there is no direct evidence that reheated rice causes pancreatic cancer. Cancer development involves genetics, metabolic health, smoking, obesity, and long-term dietary patterns. However, credible public health institutions consistently stress safe food handling, especially for older adults. By refrigerating promptly, limiting storage time, and avoiding repeated reheating cycles, you reduce unnecessary physiological stress that can accumulate quietly over time. Reducing unnecessary stress becomes even more important when we consider another everyday kitchen habit, reusing cooking oil. In many households, especially where deep frying is common, oil is heated, cooled, and reheated multiple times. It may seem economical and harmless, but chemically, oil changes each time it is exposed to high temperatures. Research published in journals indexed by PubMed shows that when oil is heated, it undergoes oxidation, hydrolysis, and polymerization. These processes produce byproducts such as aldehydes and lipid peroxides. Aldehydes in particular have been studied for their ability to damage cells and DNA under certain laboratory conditions. The more times oil is heated and cooled, the more these breakdown compounds accumulate. Imagine fresh oil as a stable chain of molecules. When heated beyond its smoke point or used repeatedly, those molecular chains begin to break apart and rearrange into unstable forms. These unstable molecules can generate free radicals. The Cleveland Clinic explains that free radicals are highly reactive molecules that contribute to oxidative stress when antioxidant defenses are overwhelmed. Oxidative stress, as described by the National Institutes of Health, occurs when damaging reactive oxygen species outnumber the body's ability to neutralize them. Persistent oxidative stress may contribute to cellular damage and inflammation. Inflammation, as outlined by Harvard Health, becomes concerning when it shifts from short-term defense to chronic low-grade activation. Chronic inflammation does not directly cause pancreatic cancer, but researchers study it as one of several biological processes that may create an environment where abnormal cells are more likely to survive. The pancreas is especially sensitive to metabolic strain because it regulates digestion and blood sugar. Diets that regularly include heavily fried foods prepared in repeatedly heated oil may increase exposure to oxidative compounds. The World Health Organization has emphasized reducing exposure to harmful substances formed during high-heat cooking. While much attention focuses on processed meats, the broader principle applies to degraded oils as well. Animal studies referenced in PubMed have shown increased markers of oxidative stress and inflammation in subjects consuming repeatedly heated oils compared to fresh oils. Although animal studies do not guarantee identical effects in humans, they provide insight into possible biological mechanisms. Reheated oils may also contain trans fats formed during repeated heating. The NIH links trans fat intake to systemic inflammation and cardiovascular risk. While heart disease and pancreatic cancer are distinct conditions, both involve inflammatory pathways. It is important to clarify that using cooking oil once at appropriate temperatures is not inherently harmful. The concern arises with repeated heating, prolonged frying sessions, and visible signs of degradation such as darkening, thickening, or rancid odor. Public health guidance does not aim to create fear around cooking. It encourages minimizing repeated exposure to compounds that contribute to oxidative stress. Understanding how oil chemistry changes with heat helps you see why simple adjustments matter. Fresh oil, moderate temperatures, and limiting reuse are small changes that reduce long-term exposure to unstable byproducts. Over years, reducing oxidative and inflammatory strain may support overall organ resilience. Over years, reducing oxidative and inflammatory strain may support overall organ resilience, including the pancreas. That same principle applies when we look at red meat, especially when it is grilled, charred, or reheated at very high temperatures. Beef, lamb, and pork are common in many diets, often enjoyed as steaks, burgers, or roasts. The concern raised by major health institutions is not about occasional consumption, it is about patterns involving frequent intake and repeated exposure to intense heat. When red meat is cooked at high temperatures, such as grilling over an open flame, pan-searing until heavily browned, or broiling until charred, chemical compounds called heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons can form. The National Institutes of Health explains that heterocyclic amines are created when amino acids and creatine in muscle meats react under high heat. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons form when fat and juices drip onto flames, producing smoke that coats the surface of the meat. Laboratory research indexed in PubMed has shown that these compounds can cause changes in DNA under experimental conditions. DNA serves as the body's instruction system for cell growth and repair. When DNA is damaged and not fully corrected, abnormal cellular behavior may occur. It is important to clarify that much of the direct DNA damage evidence comes from laboratory and animal studies. Human cancer risk is influenced by many factors, including genetics, smoking status, body weight, metabolic health, and overall diet. However, the biological plausibility of harm is one reason health organizations recommend moderation and safer cooking methods. Through its Cancer Research Division, the World Health Organization has classified red meat as probably carcinogenic, Group 2A, based on epidemiological studies linking high consumption to certain cancers, particularly colorectal cancer. This does not mean red meat directly causes pancreatic cancer. It reflects patterns observed across large populations over time. Harvard Health has noted that cancer risk appears to increase with higher intake levels and frequent high-temperature cooking. Reheating leftover steak or burgers at high heat can potentially recreate or intensify the formation of these compounds, especially if the surface becomes charred again. The pancreas may be indirectly affected through systemic inflammation and oxidative stress. The Cleveland Clinic explains that oxidative stress occurs when free radicals exceed the body's antioxidant defenses, placing strain on cells. Chronic exposure to heavily charred meats may contribute to an inflammatory internal environment. The NIH describes chronic inflammation as one of the processes studied in cancer development, including pancreatic cancer. The pancreas is metabolically active, producing digestive enzymes and regulating blood sugar through insulin. Conditions such as obesity and type 2 diabetes, both associated with chronic inflammation, are recognized risk factors for pancreatic cancer. It is essential to emphasize that reheating red meat once does not automatically increase cancer risk. Risk is cumulative and multifactorial. The Mayo Clinic highlights that maintaining a healthy weight, avoiding smoking, engaging in regular physical activity, and eating a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and fiber play important roles in overall cancer prevention strategies. Lower temperature cooking methods, avoiding charring, trimming excess fat to reduce flare-ups, and incorporating more plant-based foods can reduce exposure to harmful compounds. Public health guidance focuses on long-term dietary balance rather than eliminating specific foods entirely. Long-term dietary balance becomes even more important when we consider cream-based dishes like soups, sauces, casseroles, and gravies. These foods are especially popular among older adults because they are soft, comforting, and easy to chew. The concern here is not moderate cream consumption itself. It is how these dishes are stored, reheated, and consumed over several days. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, perishable foods should be refrigerated within 2 hours of cooking or within 1 hour in hot environments. Dairy-rich and protein-dense meals create favorable conditions for bacterial growth if cooling is delayed or temperatures fluctuate. Reheating may destroy many bacteria, but it does not always eliminate toxins they produce. The NHS advises storing leftovers in shallow containers for faster cooling and reheating until steaming hot throughout, avoiding cold spots that can allow bacteria to survive. For older adults, this guidance is particularly important because immune efficiency naturally declines with age. While foodborne illness is not directly linked to pancreatic cancer, repeated systemic stress from infections activates inflammatory responses. Harvard Health explains that inflammation is protective in short bursts, but problematic when it becomes chronic and low-grade. The National Institutes of Health describes chronic inflammation as one of the biological processes studied in cancer development. Cream-based dishes also tend to be high in saturated fat, especially when prepared with heavy cream and butter. The Mayo Clinic notes that frequent high saturated fat intake may contribute to weight gain and elevated cholesterol. Obesity is recognized by the NIH as a risk factor for pancreatic cancer. Excess body fat is metabolically active and produces inflammatory chemicals that promote insulin resistance. Insulin resistance increases the workload on the pancreas, forcing it to produce more insulin over time. The Cleveland Clinic explains that metabolic stress and oxidative stress are interconnected. Repeated temperature cycling of leftovers, prolonged storage beyond 3 to 4 days, and reheating multiple times increase contamination risk. Certain bacteria, including Listeria monocytogenes, can grow even at refrigerator temperatures, posing greater risk to older adults. It is essential to be clear, eating reheated cream soup does not directly cause pancreatic cancer. Cancer development is complex, involving genetics, smoking, alcohol use, chronic pancreatitis, diabetes, obesity, and overall lifestyle patterns. However, credible institutions consistently emphasize reducing chronic inflammation, maintaining healthy body weight, supporting metabolic health, and practicing safe food handling. The overall message from organizations such as the CDC, NIH, NHS, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, and WHO is not to create fear around food. It is to recognize that long-term health is shaped by consistent habits, proper refrigeration, limiting repeated reheating, moderating processed and heavily charred meats, avoiding degraded oils, balancing saturated fat intake, staying physically active, managing stress, and prioritizing sleep all contribute to lowering cumulative physiological strain over time. Small adjustments made consistently can support pancreatic health and overall well-being as we age. If you found this information helpful, share it with someone who values their health, subscribe for more evidence-based insights, and take a moment today to look inside your refrigerator with a more informed perspective.